Welcome to Apropos. Well, a year on from the Hamas massacre, Benjamin Netanyahu continues to avoid accepting responsibility for Israel's biggest ever security failure. Several senior military and intelligence officials have either resigned or admitted that mistakes were made. Speaking at a commemorative event to mark the October 7th anniversary, a bereaved father of one of the hostages again called on the Israeli government to hold an inquiry into the massacre. Netanyahu insists that such questions must wait for the end of the war. Our colleagues at France 2 Television have been meeting some Israelis who've lost faith in their country's intelligence and security services. Solange Moujon has more.
A wall that was meant to be impenetrable between Israel and Gaza. Yet on October 7th, 2023, there were multiple breaches along this separation barrier. Thousands of Hamas fighters passed through its barbed wire and concrete fortifications. Some came by sea, others by air, with motorized paragliders. That very morning, Yaron Mayor was at home. He fought against Hamas to protect his family. He's accepted to speak to us and relive that day. His is the story of being face to face with terrorism, of living through security failures.
There was an assailant who came through the kitchen window. I saw him, I stood up, and I walked towards him. I shot him twice. Boom, boom. And he fell outside the house.
Mayor was part of a security watch on his kibbutz. He was armed, but he was not trained or prepared to defend his home from such an extensive attack.
The worst case scenario that we, the kibbutz's intervention team, were trained for was an attack with a maximum of 10 fighters. And that's something that no one even considered as possible.
Hundreds of Hamas fighters would enter the homes on the kibbutz, bringing with them terror, death, and a total security fiasco. Surrounded, Mayor barricaded himself with his wife and children in this room. The bulletproof glass and door saved their lives. But the nightmare would take its toll. He no longer trusts Israel to protect him and his family. It took security forces 4 hours to come to their rescue.
The barrier, which was so costly, it was created with underground tunnels in mind. No one thought an attack would come from above ground.
The high-tech barrier wall has multi-layered fencing with detection tracking sensors. Below ground, there are concrete structures to prevent any tunnels from being dug. But such fortifications were far from infallible. For on October 7th, Hamas drones hit with great precision Israel's control towers. In Tel Aviv, retired generals and judges are leading a citizen-led investigation about Israel's security failures. Israelis will have to make do with the Civilian Commission of Inquiry, as the Israeli government has refused to conduct an official public probe. The Citizen Commission heard the testimonies of surveillance soldiers. Pegged as the eyes of the army, this all-female force, they claim that their warnings of suspicious activity were not taken seriously. Seen here at their base on October 7th, with Hamas just outside, many of them say that they had sent word of suspicious activity.
We observed attempts to cross the barrier, the laying of landmines, patrols. We reported all of this and no one responded.
16 of these surveillance soldiers were assassinated. 7 others were taken hostage. Erez Price is the father of one of the victims. Every week he comes to the memorial that was built right near the base to pay tribute to his murdered daughter and her troopmates. Noah Price was 19 years old. She's photographed here with her fellow soldiers before that tragic day.
It is really important to pay tribute to her memory and that of the other soldiers. Noah and all the others, they were just kids with a brilliant future before them.
Gaza is just 600 meters away, And 1 year ago, Hamas fighters were able to make the journey without being stopped. Standing before the army base where his daughter was killed, Erez Price condemns what he calls a political failure.
There was this notion among our politicians that Hamas would not do anything because they were getting money from Qatar. Their quality of life was improving, so they wouldn't do anything.
A faulty calculation, an oversight, a fatal error that would make October 7th the deadliest day for Israelis in the history of their nation.
To discuss, we're joined now by political advisor Alon Pinkas, who served as ambassador and Israel's consul general in New York between 2000 and 2004. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme. We do appreciate your time, Alon. We heard from some survivors in that report from Solange, also the families of some of those who died in the Hamas massacre. Sirens are again ringing out tonight in central Israel as it marks a year on from that massacre. How are people feeling there on this anniversary?
Well, it's good to be with you but on this bad day. But there was a siren outside where I'm sitting right now 5 minutes ago. So you understand that this is we're in the midst of all this. I have to say that even though an entire year passed, October 7th, 23 and October 7th, 24, the general mindset, the general zeitgeist in Israel now is still that of devastation, agony, humiliation, and shock. People are still angry at the political echelon. People are still disappointed with the military's performance. And even though there were some military successes in the last few months, more in Lebanon than in Gaza, I think that sense of devastation and that sense of dejection and that sense of vulnerability that was exposed is still very prevalent.
And how divided is Israel? Because looking in from the outside, it seems that it is, particularly when we see commemorations being held separately, the government holding its own memorial, some of the families getting together to hold another, then protests meanwhile ongoing outside the Prime Minister's residence. So what does that tell us about the state of Israeli society a year on from that massacre?
Well, it's united in the sense of we're all in this together. It is united in the sense that there's a war that is justified, a just war in Gaza and a just war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But that's where the unity and the solidarity end. 1 centimeter beyond that, and you see the same political divisions that existed. Mr. Netanyahu, who did not take responsibility for what had happened, who was not willing to be held responsible, who blames the entire world but himself, the military, the intelligence, President Biden, the world, Iran, everyone but himself. Even though he can claim that he had some successes against Hezbollah in the last month or so, is still very unpopular. 70% of Israelis think he should resign. In fact, 70% of Israelis think he should have resigned on October 7, 2023, and every day that has elapsed since. However, because of those relative successes in Lebanon, and because there's no real political opposition in Israel, certainly not a potent and combative opposition in Israel, he is still where he is, and he's even improving in his polls.
Yes, because it seems that his popularity has in fact been boosted in recent weeks. You've mentioned about how he's been avoiding responsibility since the Hamas massacre. What now for Netanyahu? What is going to happen in terms of those calls also for this commission of inquiry? Is there any hope for the families that the government is going to agree to hold something like this?
Yeah, there is. There is hope, but people need to understand, our viewers need to understand, that an official national inquiry commission takes 2 years before it publishes its findings. This is that they don't subscribe or they don't adjust themselves to political timetables. And until then, we will have at least one election cycle, if not 2. So even if such a commission is established, and I think it will be at some point, and even if such a commission does a very serious and rigorous job, We're looking at 2027 or 26 before it publishes its findings. While everyone knows the very simple truth, here's a government that was responsible, and a prime minister particularly, that was responsible for the worst calamity, the worst debacle, the worst catastrophe, the worst day that turned into the worst year in Israel's history. And they think it's business as usual. You know, they deal with politics and the survival of the coalition, and they play petty politics when an entire nation is in pain and agony.
And you've mentioned that, you know, Israel failing on so many fronts. You've written about that as well in terms of policy, deterrence, security, intelligence. How did Israel manage to fail on so many fronts before the Hamas massacre?
There are three reasons. The first is, what Israelis called a concept, a conceptia, is the use that the linguistic use. That is that Mr. Netanyahu, in his attempt to avoid any kind of negotiations with the Palestinians, and in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority, actively or proactively rather, strengthened Hamas by allowing money to be funneled into the Gaza Strip, particularly Qatari money. And when the Qataris, in their defense, in 2018 said that they lost control of what happens to that money that was meant for the functioning of the government, Mr. Netanyahu then dispatched his head of Mossad, then Yossi Cohen, Mr. Yossi Cohen, to implore them not to. So one thing was that you strengthen Hamas. The second was that the sense that Hamas is being deterred. The second reason that it happened is what is called a failure of imagination. When you absolutely convince yourself that Hamas is deterred, that they have no interest in a war, that they're more busy and preoccupied with governance rather than a war with Israel, you fail to see what they intend to do, and you think, and that was in your previous story, you tend to think that even if something horrific happens, it's a 10-men strong Hamas group that walks in and murders a few people or takes one or two hostages and tries to run away. Not the attack, not the assault on the scale of what we saw on October 7th. And the third reason for this failure that you mentioned is tactical. You know, the military was just ill-prepared. Based on those two concepts that I just described, the military was lax. The intelligence was there, by the way. The soldiers, particularly the female soldiers, the women soldiers, who are in charge of monitoring with all kinds of devices and technologies, have warned repeatedly that this was going to happen, but they were ignored by the upper echelons of the military chain of command.
Okay, Alan, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for your time on the programme. That is former political advisor and ambassador Alon Pinkas, who served as Israel's consul general in New York from 2000 to 2004. That is it from us for the moment.